Remember the 5th of November. Okay, you know what? I gotta do this. It's too hot.
So much better. Hey, spooky movie fans, welcome to the special Halloween edition of Movie Toast. I'm Drew Graber, and this is a show where we celebrate movies one drink at a time. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to monster mash that like button and subscribe to my channel, because I'll be releasing new videos every week. Now, without further ado, here's to the horror genre. From monsters to demons to axe murderers, the horror genre has seen it all. In fact, horror films are over a century old, with the first horror film being Les Manoirs du Diable from 1896. That makes horror films older than World War I and sliced bread. But in recent years, Hollywood has turned it into a bunch of cheap cash grabs and mediocre franchises that has ultimately made the genre start to feel stale and unoriginal. This is what I call the horror genre problem, trademark pending, and I define it as this. It is an over-reliance of subgenres such as slashers and paranormal or demonic possession films, resulting in a false image for the genre as a whole, in correlation to the tendency to stress the genre over the story.
I needed to find someone with friends that I could trick into coming here.
Hollywood tends to find a formula that makes money and sticks with it, especially in the horror genre. So if a slasher movie makes a lot of money, expect a surplus of slasher films in the next couple years. Horror has become about fads and about what is in, and in doing so we get a lot of abysmal and disappointing cookie-cutter films because of it. And by releasing a bunch of slasher films in an attempt for a quick cash grab, the market becomes oversaturated and the subgenre exhausted. This causes them to ignore the many other subgenres and properties that could keep the market fresh and entertaining. And with a genre that is so rich with so many different kinds of stories, it's really frustrating to watch these studios pump out the same films over and over again. Hollywood seems to have this obsessive need with the horror genre to make unnecessary franchises more often than any other film genre. The sequels are often far worse than the original and tend to fall into that cookie-cutter formula. And while there are a lot of horror sequels we can look forward to, like It Chapter 2, movies like Happy Death Day 2 and Paranormal Activity 27 are not necessary, especially if they are getting in the way of other horror properties that allow the audiences to explore what the genre as a whole has to offer. Another issue with the horror genre is putting the importance of the genre in front of the story. What I mean by this is when a studio makes a horror film, they are so focused on making the movie scary, they completely neglect the characters and the plot that drives the movie. Therefore, having this empty movie filled with a bunch of jump scares and characters we don't care about. Not to say that a film meant to scare the crap out of you can't be done well, but more often than not, a horror film would be much better off to have a good story rather than be just a cheap cash grab with a bunch of jump scares. Now, I'm not saying stop making slasher and paranormal films. I'm not even saying stop making cookie-cutter films. All types of movies have a place and an audience, but we shouldn't ignore the full potential of the genre. There are plenty of other subgenres to explore. And not all horror films have to be designed to scare you out of your shoes. Some can have subtle horror elements that make them unique and interesting.
Boy, do I hate being right all the time.
The most important thing to remember with any movie is that story should always come first. Always. Now yes, there are some movies that can be an exception where a concept or character can be so strong that a movie can almost solely rely on them for success. But for the most part, story is the most important part of any movie. Period. But this is where a lot of horror movies tend to struggle. Focusing too much on horror elements and neglecting a well-written plot and strong characters can result in the film not being scary because we don't care about the characters in the first place. Characters are everything in a horror film. They are what separate good horror from cheap jump scares. By having a compelling protagonist, it allows the audience to form an attachment to them, making you care whether they live or die. They immerse you into the story and invest your emotions into the plot, which is why when these characters are put into dangerous situations, you are generally more scared for them than you are yourself. This is why there's always a lack of jump scares in these movies, because they can rely on your emotional attachment to these characters and mix it with high stakes and suspense to create the thrill of fear and anxiety without making you jump out of your seat every 5 minutes. Now, I know not all horror films are bad. We have actually had quite a few really good horror films in the last couple of years. We've already talked about two of them, It and A Quiet Place. I also want to talk about Get Out. Now, what these three films have in common, or not in common, are not only are they each a different type of horror subgenre, but they each have a compelling story and likable characters. Get Out is a psychological horror film, seeming to be reminiscent or even inspired by The Twilight Zone. This movie I wouldn't say is all that scary, but it is still a great movie and has a lot of strong horror elements. And like I said before, not all horror films have to be scary. Get Out is a great example of that. It is basically a coming-of-age story with horror elements interwoven into the story as a monster that is essentially their fears incarnated into a physical form. This movie is one of my favorites of the last couple of years and is a great film. A Quiet Place is a post-apocalyptic monster film. Now, A Quiet Place is one of those movies that even if it didn't have a super good story, the concept itself was strong enough to carry the movie. But having a strong story with strong characters and really high stakes made the movie that much more bone-chilling and anxiety-inducing. But the point is, each of these films are fresh and entertaining. They are perfect examples as to how the horror genre should be handled and proves to studios that these types of movies can still make them a lot of money. Get Out made over $255 million out of its estimated $5 million budget. That means they made 51 times the original budget. It and A Quiet Place made back their budget 20 times over, with It making $700 million out of an estimated budget of $35 million, and A Quiet Place making $332 million out of just $17 million. These movies are a prime example of how the horror genre should be handled in Hollywood. If one studio is doing one thing, don't just try and do that. Do something different. Not that you can't have movies from the same subgenre, but it shouldn't just focus on that one subgenre. If one studio makes a good slasher, other studios shouldn't just start making a bunch of slashers to copy them and make easy money. They should try to find a good, compelling script and make a strong horror film, because they can still make good money from that. And they should especially explore other horror subgenres, because horror can be used in so many different ways. I think it's good for studios to explore the broadness of the genre and the amount of crazy and amazing stories it can tell. The horror genre is one of my absolute favorites, and I couldn't think of a better time to discuss it with Halloween being around the corner. I would love to see it grow into the broad and creative genre I know it can be, and the best part about it is that the horror genre is timeless. No matter what, horror stories will always be a part of our culture. While many genres will come and go, we can always count on the thrill of films that explore the world of the unknown.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a happy Halloween. Cheers.